Let's talk about the Atlantic forest. Okay, so first we're going to talk about the landscape. So the Atlantic forest is the third largest biome in Brazil. It covers about 13% of the surface after the Cerrado, which is the second largest. So it runs from the northeast here, from the Rio Grande do Norte state, this little state here, all the way throughout the coast to Rio Grande do Sul state here. So it goes along the coast, mostly along the coast, but then it goes inland here. In southeastern Brazil, it starts going inland and then goes all the way inland here into Paraguay and Argentina here a little bit. Okay, so that's kind of a different from the Amazon, which is more of like a round shaped biome. The Atlantic forest is a long, narrow, sometimes narrow strip, sometimes not very narrow, but anyway, it's a long, long shaped forest running from the north to the south, and that has a lot of different latitudes and different weathers and climates. Remember that the Atlantic margin of Brazil is a divergent margin. It's diverge because it's running away from the African plate. So that movement started when the Gondwana supercontinent started breaking up. Like about 100 million years ago, and then you started the opening of the Southern Atlantic Ocean. So there's a lot of geological features in common between the eastern margin of Brazil and South America and the western margin of Africa. So you have this the Brazilian highlands here, and then because of that, most of the rivers, especially in the northeast of the Atlantic forest and the southeast as well, most of the rivers are actually short compared to the Amazonian rivers and run from west to east to the Atlantic Ocean. Okay, so for example, the Paraguaçu and Jequitinhonha and Doce rivers, they all run from the Espinhaço range, which is this mountain range going from north to south here, and they all go to the Atlantic Ocean. Okay. The San Francisco River, which starts here in Minas Gerais and runs to the north, it actually runs through the Cerrado and Caatinga biomes, and then it reaches the Atlantic forest only at the mouth here. But and then in the south of Brazil, in the southeast and south of Brazil, instead of the system changes because the rivers actually go from the east to the west, and they all drain to the Paraná River. Okay, so these rivers are going this way, draining to the Paraná River basin, which then joins the Paraguay River and then drains into the ocean at De La Plata. And then you have in the south, you have also the Uruguay River draining the same way into the La Plata region. Okay. So this is kind of the general pattern of the rivers and the mountains. So you have the Espinhaço range here. Here you have the Mantiqueira range, which runs parallel to the coastal range, and the coastal range goes all the way down. Okay. The other feature that's important is the continental shelf, which is this area here in the ocean, very narrow in the northeast, but very broad in the southeast and south. And this area is now submerged, but it was land 20,000 years ago when the sea level was low because of the ice age. This is a typical Serra do Mar, the coastal range in the south and southeast of Brazil. You have the ocean and the beach right where the forest starts, right there, and then you have really steep mountains right at the coast, and forest covering these areas. And because of the terrain of rough terrain, you have several waterfalls in the Atlantic forest. This is Salto Morato, which is a 100-meter high waterfall in Paraná, south of Brazil. Another striking feature are the canyons. In the south of Brazil, you have the canyon like this one, the Fortaleza Canyon in the Aparados da Serra. That's at the border between Rio Grande do Sul and Santa Catarina. Beautiful, really high canyons with Atlantic forest covering these areas. Also in southeastern Brazil, you have Inselbergs, which are these really large granite rock outcrops. In Rio, for instance, most people know the landscape in Rio, so you have really huge rocks that are the Inselbergs. Also in other parts, you have that, like in Espírito Santo state here, you have these pontões, which are these really tall granite mountains sticking out of the landscape. The limits of the Atlantic forest, that's a very, not controversial, but that's a very debated topic, because different authors have limited the Atlantic forest in very different ways throughout the time, but some are very restrictive. So like this proposal here, only really the coastal forests of, in here and then here would be Atlantic forest. Some of them stretch a little more to the north and the south, and sometimes inland. So some of them have this a narrow strip, but some expansion here in the southeast, but no expansion in the south. But the more recent approach is to have something like what's in here. So it's the biome in the sense that it goes, it's a straight area here in the northeast, and then it expands to the west, and then it reaches the west and into Paraguay and Argentina. Okay, but then even that varies, right? This map here shows the main divergences between the more recent maps down here, so the consensus would be the dark areas here, which everybody thinks are Atlantic forest. But then the divergence are mainly here in the north, in the interior part of the northeastern Brazil, because these are islands of forests in the Caatinga, in the dry, almost desert-like landscape. But they're really moist forests, usually in highland areas, which are usually called the brejos de altitude, would translate into high elevation swamps, but they're not swamps because they're forests. So I don't like the name. The name brejos is confusing. Anyway, those are really moist forests, and they have elements like plant species and animal species from the Atlantic forest. So most people consider these areas as enclaves, as insertions of Atlantic forest in a different biome. The Cerrado here in São Paulo is also an area where most people believe it's a Cerrado patch within the Atlantic forest. Others regard that as just Atlantic forest. In the south here you have a difference too, and then in the west here you have a difference too. Okay. We're here, and like I'd like to use the broad sense. So the Atlantic forest includes all those areas. So these are the main vegetation types that we see throughout the Atlantic forest, and they vary a lot. They're very different. Okay, so you have the typical Atlantic forest would be especially the broadleaf evergreen rainforest of the coast, which are these also called umbrophilous dense forest or coastal dense forest. These are really dense forests with a lot of rain. Okay. Especially because of the mountains the mountains here force the rain to be on the eastern side. But then a very important component are the semi-deciduous forests or seasonally dry forests. Okay, which is this green here. Okay, this is the interior forest here. Most of Minas Gerais state here is this kind of forest. That's also very relevant. Yeah, and another one is the mixed forest or the Araucaria forest. Okay, the Araucaria forest is this one. It's dominated by this emergent Araucaria trees. I'm going to show you in a moment. And you also have some other associated ecosystems like restingas, which are like coastal scrub, which are on the coast in some areas. The mangroves, the salt marshes in the south. And then you have transitional areas, we call ecotones, which are transitional between the Atlantic forest and the Cerrado, for instance. So you see that, you know, all these deciduous forests here, some people regard that as a caatinga, not Atlantic forest, but you see that here you have semi-deciduous forests, so forests that only lose part of the trees only lose part of the leaves during the dry season. Some of the features, this is Pico da Bandeira, which is the highest peak in Brazil. It's right here between the states of Minas Gerais and Espírito Santo. And then you see here, this is a high elevation grassland or campo, or you see rocks and you see, it's not a forest, I mean, it's grasslands, but it's native. Mangroves, which, you know, along the coast, are very important for reproduction of fish and other marine animals. This is the Restinga, which is this scrub area, usually with a sandy soil, with the dunes are very common in this area, and also this kind of vegetation. And this is the Araucaria tree and the Araucaria forest. So they're emergent, you know, they emerge along the forest in the south of Brazil, going to the southeast, but mostly in the south of Brazil. Well, another very important feature of the Atlantic forest is people and cities, okay, large cities. So 145 million people live in the Atlantic forest biome, okay? That's, you know, basically 3/4 of Brazilian population live there. So you have large cities like São Paulo to the left and Rio to the right, you know, like 10 million people living, and then so it's within the Atlantic forest. This is São Paulo, okay, so it's a very large city and also connected to other cities nearby, so it's a huge metropolitan area. So this is right here. This is interesting because you see that's the Serra do Mar, the coastal range that I showed you before. Actually, that picture that I showed of the Serra do Mar was taken, you know, around here somewhere. Okay, so you see the ocean and then forest. You know, there's a city here, you know, some small towns here. Islands, that's also a very important component of the Atlantic forest. There are several continental islands along the coast, like this one, São Sebastião Island, one of the largest. So you see the really steep mountain running here. And then, and here you have a typical pattern of deforestation, fragmentation, you know, fragments of forest. The city here, some water dams that drain water to the city. So that's kind of a typical landscape for the Atlantic forest. Here's some vegetation profiles in 3 different areas from north to south. So that's the northeast of Brazil. So you have this profile, and that's so you have a coastal Atlantic forest, dense, and then you have Caatinga, and then here on top of this area, which is higher up, you have Atlantic forest again showing up, and this is the Brejo. This is these are those represent those isolated patches of Atlantic forest within the Caatinga, but it's really Atlantic forest in terms of forest composition, forest structure, and plant and animal species. Here is in Bahia, also in the northeast, almost southeast Brazil. Then you have the lowland area here with the rainforest, dense forest. Then you have a plateau here with this dense forest as well. It's called Tabuleiro forest. And then you have seasonally semi-deciduous forest, so seasonally dry forest here. So it goes from a really wet, and then it gets a little bit drier as you go to the west. And then finally here in the south, where you have the coastal range, the Serra do Mar, that's, you know, where you get the ocean, and then you go really up really fast. If this gets really high, you get the grasslands on top of it. Okay, so those are high elevation grasslands with the rocky areas, usually rock outcrops. Then you go again, Atlantic forest down here, which is usually drier than the one here. Sometimes you have grasslands here, and then you have a transitional area, and then you get to the seasonal semi-deciduous forest here in the interior, because all the rain falls, near the Serra do Mar range. Okay, that's it.